Steve Cohen, the Met owner, spoke to the assembled media today in Port St. Lucie, and essentially he talked about making the season a success, getting back to the playoffs, getting to the World Series, obviously winning the World Series. Talked about Soto, wants to get below the Cohen tax, the whole deal. But the thing that struck me is you could hear his absolute bewilderment and disappointment about the Mets' attendance last year. The Mets, a major market team with a beautiful ballpark and a team that went to the National League Championship Series, they finished 18th in attendance. So they're in the lower half of Major League Baseball in attendance. They obviously have a rabid fan base. And I am not one of these people that's going to sit here and spend people's money, because I know it is hella expensive to go to any sporting event now. Even in the most inexpensive seats, you're going to drop a lot of money. And the average Joe and the average Jane, to take two kids to a ballpark, have a decent seat, you're talking $300-400. And I think I'm being conservative. But still, things are expensive all over. So the Yankee tickets are also expensive. And they draw over 3 million people every year. They average over 40,000 people per game, no matter what the opponent is or who the opponent is. Could be the A's, could be the Twins, whatever. There's going to be 40,000 people in that ballpark. And I would say that the prices in the Bronx are probably higher than the prices at Citi Field. Now, the Yankees have been winning for longer than the Mets, but the Mets were an exciting team last year. They did not have that transcendent star, I'll give you that, like the Yankees have with Judge, and last year, Judge and Soto. But here's what Steve Cohen said. He came right out and said he does not like that the Mets are 18th in attendance.
Yeah, I didn't like it. Okay, that really bothered me. 18th in attendance when we're right in the middle of a pennant race. I've said this before. The series against the Nationals, right before the final Philly series, I think there were 18,000 fans in the stadium during a great pennant race. And so I'm really hopeful this year. I mean, I'm told that usually attendance lags performance. And so I'm really looking forward to this year being a year when the fans come out. I think the fans are having a great time. I mean, when I look out on the stadium, I think it's a great game presentation. We have a great team, I think. I'm really excited by. I think it's going to be a fun place to be this year.
Well, I'll tell you what. This is a guy who has a $330 to $340 million payroll, who was funding the team out of his own pocket. Remember, the Mets don't own SNY. The Wilpons do. Steve Cohen does not own SNY. So he is getting a rights fee from SNY, whatever that is, but he's not getting the profit that SNY makes like the Yankees get from Yes, because the Yankees own Yes. The Mets don't own SNY. The Wilpons would not sell it because the Wilpons are making money with SNY. So this is a guy that's funding things out of his own pocket. The losses he's incurred are coming out of the Steve Cohen I'm a Met fan fund. That's why when Hal Steinbrenner said, some of us teams can't do what the Dodgers are doing. Maybe he's talking about the Mets, because if the Mets are just running their franchise on their revenue, then they're spending more than they're bringing in. So for Steve Cohen to notice the lack of attendance is somewhat alarming, I would say, for Met fans. This guy doesn't want to continue to lose money, especially if they don't win World Series, and especially if the fans don't turn out. Doesn't want to do that. I don't blame him. Right now, he is funding the Mets out of the fact that he said that in the first 5 years of his ownership, they would win a World Series. This is year 5. And they got a chance. I don't think they have the starting pitching for it. They certainly have the lineup for it. They're building a bullpen for it. The starting pitching is not the case. But he knows exactly how much he's spending and how much he's losing. And he actually said during this conversation with the media that he'd like to get below the Cohen tax.
I mean, I'd like to get below the Cohen tax, or whatever. I'm sure it's about me. Because I mean, there's a lot of Cohens out there. I mean, I was saying to somebody before, I'm a piker now compared to the Dodgers.
So he wanted to get below the Cohen tax, which is 301 this year. But then they ended up signing Alonso for $30 million. That took them well over it, although they were very, very close anyway. So he's a repeat offender, and that means that you get 110% tax. So you spend $1 and you get taxed for $1.10. That's just the way it works. So that's an issue. That is an issue for them. And he said that somewhere down the line, when they get their infrastructure right and they get their minor league system right, that he wants to be able to promote young people up through the system, and those are cost-controlled players. He said, but we didn't think we'd go over the tax this year, but free agency is a lot more expensive than you think. And they obviously spent an awful lot of money on Soto. But you know what? That's probably worth it for them, and maybe that does drive attendance. And I want to ask all the Met fans that are listening. And again, I'm not spending your money. That's not the case. And I wouldn't be saying it if other teams in this market were not drawing. Tickets at the Garden are exorbitantly expensive. Every Nick and Ranger game is sold out. Tickets at Yankee Stadium, very expensive. Not sold out, but $3.2, $3.3 million a year. Over $40,000 for an 81-game home season. The Mets, 18th. 18th. And you could say, well, winning lags, attendance lags winning. Okay, the Mets didn't make the playoffs, and it was a disappointing season the year before, last year. But the year before that, they won 101 games. So it's not like they've been a terrible team for a long time. I noticed it, even though they were winning 101 games. So what's the reason behind it? Hey, I know it's tough to go to a ballpark. Tough to park, tough to drive there, tough even to take, mass transportation. But I wouldn't be saying it about the Mets if the other teams in New York were also having problems getting people to come through the turnstiles. Not the case. Soto might make a difference. You would think that there should be a lot of advanced sales for this season with the Mets. And Cohen said it's great having Soto in the lineup.
How great is that, right? I mean, to have him on the team, it'll be exciting to watch him, how he plays. He's so singularly focused on baseball. And so, it'd be great having him in the lineup, right? It's pretty exciting. I think the fans are going to love it.
Now, the fans would also love a World Series, and Steve Cohen was asked what would make the season a success.
Well, we got to make the playoffs. Okay, that's the minimum. After getting a taste of being in the league championship, we want to go to the World Series, right? And we want to win. And if we put ourselves in that position enough, maybe it doesn't happen this year, maybe it does. But if we keep putting ourselves in position in the playoffs and to make a deep run, we're going to win a World Series at some point.
Well, there you go, and that's always been his intent, is to win a World Series. And now you could also think about 2026, because today negotiations between the Blue Jays and Vlad Guerrero have broken off. Guerrero said he was not going to negotiate once the workouts began in Dunedin, and they begin today, so they have broken off. Now, he did leave open the possibility if they made a great offer, he would consider it, which means they haven't totally broken off, but he doesn't want to negotiate, so to speak. And I don't understand what the Blue Jays are doing. I don't. This is a guy who was born in Canada. He's a Canadian citizen. He wants to be there. Now, maybe, just maybe, he was asking for an exorbitant amount of money. But I'm going to tell you this. He's going to be 27 when he becomes a free agent. And I know he plays a position, first base, that doesn't seem like it demands big money, as you could see with Pete Alonso. But Vlad Guerrero is just 27 years old when he becomes a free agent. I think the Mets are going to be really, really interested, and that's why, essentially, Pete Alonso was signed to a one-year deal. Now, if he doesn't opt out, then it becomes a 2-year deal, and I guess he just becomes a DH for the second year if they do get Vlad Guerrero. But I'm wondering, the Blue Jays' thought process, all they've done in the last couple of years was be left at the altar for all of these great players that they made bids for. Ohtani, Soto. Runs the gamut. Pitchers. Everybody says no. This guy wants to stay. So I believe, he said that this is where he wants to be, even when he becomes a free agent. But here's the deal, everybody. Once the other 29 teams start to bid, all bets are off. I bet you he does not end up back in Toronto. And if the Mets really want him, they're going to get him. Cohen was asked about Vlad Jr. for next offseason.
Yeah, he's a great ball player, and once again, I'll worry about that next year. Obviously with payroll considerations, and you really can't have. You can't have too many long-term contracts because then you lose your roster flexibility. So you got to be really careful. But I'll let my baseball people make that decision.
Well, I see the point he's making, but you have a 15-year deal with Soto, and I'm sure that Guerrero is going to want a 10-year deal. After this year, you've got 6 more years left of Lindor, and I believe 6 more years left of Nimmo. I don't think you're locked into that long-term. You don't have any long-term deals really with your pitchers. So it's going to be interesting to see if they make that run. Now, one thing that I would warn Steve Cohen about, his answer should have been, that's somebody else's player. I'm not going to talk about him. And he essentially talked about him and talked about, you got to watch out for long-term contracts. I bet you the Blue Jays are actually going to complain to Major League Baseball. This is a guy under contract for another team. And the answer is always, that guy's under contract. I'm not going to talk about that. But Jeff Passan was on with Bart and Carlin, really, and today it was not Bart and Carlin because Bart was off. Jordan Ronan was with Carlin, and Jeff Passan was on with them, and he said, the Mets really want Vlad. You know what? They'll get him.
When you are the Mets, all you have is first world problems. And so if they want Vladdy, this is very simple. If the New York Mets really, really want Vladimir Guerrero Jr., I think they will get him. Because at the end of the day, they will be willing to pay more money than anyone else if they value him that way. And they have the resources to go out and do it. And if you're trying to build a team to compete with the Los Angeles Dodgers, there are worse places to start than with Francisco Lindor hitting first, Juan Soto hitting second, and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. hitting third.
I will tell you this, though. I see what Cohen is saying, though. If his intent is to get under the Cohen tax in the coming years, you're not going to do that. You're probably never going to do it if you get Vlad Guerrero. Because Guerrero is going to demand somewhere upwards of $40 million a year. So that'll be a $400 million contract. And Guerrero said today that he knew what his worth was even before Soto signed. The Soto contract has no input at all on what he was demanding from the Blue Jays. It's going to be interesting to see the market that develops for him because I'll tell you what, if you look at Soto and his performance line, he has been a steady, great performer year after year after year. There's no dips. He's great every year. Even his years that are not as good as the other ones, they're still outstanding. That's why when you look at his numbers, at his age, only Ted Williams compares. Vlad Guerrero, not as consistent. There have been some really bad years. I remember last year he had a great year for the Blue Jays. The year before he did not. And somebody close to the Blue Jays, when I was doing a game with the Yankees up in Toronto, said, they're not going to sign him. And I said, why? He said, because he's too unreliable. They like him, but he's kind of goofy, and they're not going to sign him. Now, I don't know if that's why they didn't give him what he wanted, that they don't feel that there's a reliability factor where, he's going to have a bad year or a good year or whatever. I just remember he does do some weird things. Like when the Yankees were trying to clinch a playoff spot one year, they lost a game in Toronto, and he came off the field going, not in my house. And they were out of it. Not in my – well, the next day, the Yankees clinched in his house. So, those type of things concern the Blue Jays. Like, he says things that probably aren't the best thing to say for the franchise, but it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see the market that's out there because the talent is undeniable. The age is very attractive. That's an age that even David Stearns would sign off on a long-term deal. Because if you give a 27-year-old a 10-year contract, it only takes him to 37. Now, they gave a 15-year contract to Soto. That takes him to 41, and probably the last 4 years of that contract are not going to be worth it. But if you win a World Series with him, it's worth it. You take that chance.